folks, welcome back to the Shoogly shed. In today's episode I'm hoping to continue with the GS500 engine build. As you saw last time, I got the crankcases together. Today I want to get all the stuff back into the sides of the engine, all the parts, the clutch and the starter stuff on this side. Once that's all in, the casings will need cleaned and painted, and then get bolted on with new gaskets, and then hopefully it can move on to the top end again. On the clutch side of the engine, we've got obviously the clutch basket to go on, and there's also the shifting mechanisms to go on in here with the rod, and there's also the oil pump to fit too. And then other side of the engine, we have the magneto still to go on, and the starter gear and the starter motor. Alrighty, so that's all the parts fitted to the outside of the engine. We've got the clutch, the oil pump's under there, the gear shift mechanism is all in there. Around the other side of the engine, just spin it around on my cardboard. Magnet rotor and the starter drive here. Then there's gear shift rod over here, and the clutch rod is in there. That's pretty much everything that goes on the outside of the engine. The only other thing are the breaker points that go on here, but I won't fit them yet because the clutch casing has to go on first, and then they go on the outside, and then there's a smaller points cover that goes over them. Okay, it's a new day and I've come out to the shed to finish off the last job, which is to pop on the crankcase covers. Everything that goes inside them has now been bolted on, and the last thing to do is to pop the gaskets onto the freshly painted casings and close it up, and then move on to the top end. I'm waiting on delivery of new piston rings, so that's kind of stalled the top end rebuild just now, but you can move on with this, getting these buttoned up, and then the engine will be nice and sealed and protected. No doubt I'll probably chip my freshly painted casings at some point, but such is the way of working in a very small enclosed space. Everyone has a different way of doing this, and I'm sure someone is going to tell me that this way is wrong, but I don't care. This is what I do on all my bikes, and so far so good. I use a little bit of high temperature silicone sealant, not a lot, a very thin smear on the casing itself. I stick the gasket to the casing, and then I bolt that on clean onto the crankcase. That way, if you ever need to take this off for inspection or maintenance, the gasket stays attached to the casing and not to the engine, and it also tends to keep the gasket in slightly better condition, so you might be able to get away with reusing it. For example, I don't know, maybe your clutch plates need replaced, something like that. You can just whip the casing off and bolt it back up, and you should get away with reusing that gasket. It actually makes removing gaskets a little bit easier as well, because the silicone, although it does bond, it's fairly easy to scrape off with a plastic scraper, as opposed to trying to get, very old stuck on gaskets off of clean metal, which they do tend to bond entirely. So this is the way I do it. If you have a different way of doing it that works for you, fantastic. This is just what I do. A bit of a confession to make. I went really heavy with the silicone sealant when I mated the crankcase halves together, and I ended up having to take it apart and clean it all off again. The reason being, if you put too much on, the excess gets squirted out of the joint when the bolts get torqued up, and you end up with chunks of silicone coming away inside your engine casing. No big deal, usually gets caught in the filter. However, there is this possibility that those chunks can get sucked into an oil gantry and possibly into an oil jet and prevent oil from accessing a very important part of the engine, then overheating, and then there's a good chance you're going to seize your engine or at least cause some kind of major damage. So that was a lesson I learned the hard way. I had to re-seal this engine. I had to take it apart again after assembling the bottom half, reassemble it with a thin smear of gasket sealant around the mating surfaces, and as far as I can see into the casing in here, there's none squirting out on the inside. So that is, as I say, annoying. However, it's a lesson that's worth learning now, not a lesson you want to learn when your engine seizes up. So I kept all the old crankcase bolts, but to be honest, I'm probably going to ditch these for a worthwhile upgrade, which are A2 stainless steel bolts. This is an engine kit for this bike that I got for under £20. It's basically assemblies of all the stainless steel bolts you'll need for the covers and for a few other bits and pieces around, for example the starter cover and that kind of thing. It's a nice wee finish to the bike, and it also means you're not going to have ugly rusty bolts anytime soon. top tip for stainless bolts going into aluminium casings is a little bit of copper slip on the bolts. It just prevents them seizing up anytime soon. I believe, could be wrong, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that stainless has a tendency to seize into aluminium eventually, so this is quite an important step. Not up to torque yet, just got them all in snug, finger tight more or less, with the impact driver. I would caution anyone to do these bolts up to their torque with an impact driver. Would caution anyone to do any bolts up to their torque with an impact driver on a casing. It is fragile aluminium and you are more than likely to crack it, so it's worth the time doing it by hand with a torque wrench to make sure everything is snug and to make sure you don't over torque any of the bolts and damage something. Okay, clutch side is all buttoned up. Moving on to the stator side and the stator cover. So that is pretty much everything done to the sides of the engine. The only thing I haven't done is put the breaker cover on, because I'll still need to turn the engine over to do the timing of when the top end goes back together, and I haven't fitted the neutral switch yet, just because I haven't cleaned it up. I haven't got around to that today. However, aside from those two things, that's it, all buttoned up, all the bolts are done up to torque, and gaskets are nice and fresh, so hopefully no oil leaks or anything from that. So as usual, give me a like, leave me a comment, and more importantly, click that subscribe button to subscribe to the Shoogly Shed YouTube channel for the rest of the videos in this series and the following ones to come, where this engine gets finally finished. Feels like a long time, but we're almost there, folks. We're almost there. See you later. God, I hope the top end goes back together easier than the crankcase did.